There are very few people in the world of Canadian technology who genuinely need no introduction, and our next guest falls into that rare category. But I've been tasked with doing that, so I'm going to do my best to characterize the ongoing career of Mr. Jim Balsillie. His career is unique in Canadian business. He's a co-founder of the Institute for New Economic Thinking based in New York City, the Council of Canadian Innovators based in Toronto, and the Centre for International Governance based in Waterloo. He currently chairs the Board of Directors of Sustainable Development Technology Canada. He's also the founder of the Balsillie School of International Affairs and Arctic Research Foundation, which we might be needing him for today. He's a member of the Global Advisory Board of the Stockholm Resilience Centre and an honorary captain of the Royal Canadian Navy. Mr. Balsillie was the only Canadian ever appointed to the U.S. Business Council and the sole private sector representative on the UN Secretary General's High Panel for Sustainability. He's the only Canadian member of the U.S. Council on Competitiveness and an internationally renowned voice on innovation strategy, competitiveness, and international economic policy. He testified to the U.S. Senate on the American Innovates Act, a landmark legislation for management of intellectual property. His awards include several honorary degrees, Canadian Business Hall of Fame, Mobile World Congress Lifetime Achievement Award, Time Magazine's 100 Most Influential People, and 3-time Barron's list of world's top CEOs. Many of you, of course, will know Jim as the former chairman and co-CEO of a company called Research in Motion. Before Apple, before Samsung, before Huawei, there was BlackBerry, and it would not be an overstatement to say that RIM changed the landscape of Canadian technology, if not the way we looked at our entire economy. The company's impact was global. In 2006, for example, Webster's New World College Dictionary named crackberry its new word of the year. For a moment, at least, Canada was not the home of logging or potash mining or the capital of extracting oil from tar sands. It was the home of BlackBerry. We haven't had too many research in motion since, have we? Should we be pursuing the latest Amazon headquarters? Should we be cozying up to Google? Or should we be creating and controlling our own intellectual property? Over the next hour or so, we are going to address what Canada should be doing in innovation and how each of you can play a part. Jim is going to begin this segment with a talk of about 25 minutes, and then he will be joined in conversation with David Scott, who many of you know from Toronto Star and Boston Globe, and is now the editor of a terrific website called The Logic. Please welcome Jim Balsillie.
Good afternoon, everyone. First, I'd like to thank Nick Waddell for inviting me to present to you today and for organizing such a large gathering of investors and entrepreneurs. With all of Canada's potential, Nick and I share a passionate interest for our domestic companies to succeed globally. Canada has an innovation problem. 30 years without national strategies for 21st century economy resulted in zero growth in Canada's innovation outputs over this period. Last year's Bloomberg Index for country innovation performance placed Canada in 22nd place behind Poland, a country whose economy was on its knees 30 years ago as a result of Cold War communism. We generated this outcome via a unique ecosystem, one in which public discourse and policy input is dominated by a plague of people who have no experience commercializing ideas or expertise in innovation economics. Retired bankers, retired civil servants, retired journalists, current and retired university administrators, along with the incubator administrators who run our incubator accelerator industrial complex, have together proliferated opinions that are outdated, misguided, and often just made up. And in the process, they have systemically pushed aside the input from our most successful high-growth entrepreneurs. This formidable self-referencing constituency, with all of its calcified thinking, generates by far the most superficial discourse in innovation of any of the 150 countries I've done business in. As a result, Canadian policymakers have succumbed to all manner of theories, opinions, and non-innovation innovation reports, inserting ideas into the debate and vigorous discourse is always very healthy. But we need to interrogate all the claims made in the name of Canadian tech entrepreneurs. In a minute, I will show you how the uninformed statements from these intermediaries constitute the very troubling inputs into our policy-making mix and add to our national innovation challenges. My dissident brand of advocacy is grounded in my experience growing RIM from an idea to $20 billion in annual sales, selling Canadian intellectual property in 150 countries, and seeing how smart innovation economies operate worldwide. I'm also co-founder of a New York-based think tank that allows me to interact with Nobel Prize-winning economists with deep knowledge in innovation economics. When I was growing RIM, our ecosystem's ideas and policy input was led by domestic entrepreneurs. We had no intermediaries, only direct input that manifested wind at our backs. My message to entrepreneurs and key investors here today is this: you must reclaim this space and in the process ensure that firm-level input is at the center of Canada's innovation strategies. Today, I'll give you an overview of the global innovation system, talk a bit about Canada's challenges within the system, and then comment on how you, as entrepreneurs and investors, can take back your ecosystem. Today, IP and data are the world's most valuable business and national security assets. In 1975, 17% of the value of the S&P 500 was intangibles, but currently intangibles comprise almost 90% of the S&P 500 value. To give you a sense of scale, the 5 most valuable companies in the world are worth around $4 trillion together, but their balance sheets report only $225 billion in tangible assets, or just over 5% of their total value. The vast majority of their market value is comprised of IP and data, not bricks and mortar, or even machines. According to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, IP and data-intensive industries currently contribute over $7 trillion annually to the U.S. economy. What this means in practical terms is that every business today is a tech business. I will show you in a minute that cannabis, which I know is a big item on the agenda for this conference, is also a tech business. The tangible and intangible economies are fundamentally different. The objective of the traditional tangible economy is to move inventory, while the knowledge-based economy of intangibles, the objective is to amass valuable intellectual property. The way you generate revenue in the traditional economy is by producing and selling physical goods. But the way you generate revenue in today's knowledge-based economy is by restricting access to your amassed IP and then have people pay you economic rents. From a policy perspective, the most important thing to realize is that the instruments designed to govern the traditional economy versus the intangible-based economy are also very different. Starting in the mid-70s, when the global economy began to shift from the traditional economy to the knowledge-based economy, companies and countries focused on strategically generating and controlling valuable IP assets, and more recently with the data-driven economy, to strategically control valuable data assets. Wealth accrues to the owners who amass these two rent-generating assets. The pace of this shift is accelerating, as evidenced by the recent rise in IP filings in the past couple decades, shown in the two charts in this slide. A recent U.S. National Bureau of Economic Research report states, and I quote, "Patents are the most concrete and comparable measure of innovative output over countries in time," end of quote. The 8 most valuable companies in the world are IP and data-driven. Countries that generate and control valuable and IP and data assets are the winners in today's economy. This accumulation of intangible assets is being turbocharged by a big data tsunami sourced from a vast array of sensors that form the Internet of Things. The current shift is unprecedented in terms of its rapidity and demands sophisticated approaches both at the firm level and at the design of public policies. For those of you that are investing and running cannabis companies, pay close attention to the IP strategies and how you increase your freedom to operate strategies vis-a-vis your customers and competitors. IP rights that govern your industry include patents, trademarks, and plant breeder rights. There's now a scramble to claim as much of the commons as possible and to be able to charge economic rents through a variety of means. Here I have just the latest sample of headlines about the cannabis industry, including the recent rise in IP filings. Countries are working hard to accumulate valuable IP assets because it's a precondition to commercializing. The Patent Cooperation Treaty is a 152-member country agreement that provides a unified procedure for filing international patents. Given that PCT filings must be filed in the home country of the applicant's company or inventor, they are considered a reasonable proxy for a country's ability to generate valuable IP assets. Over the past 3 years of reports from 2014 to 2017, global PCT filings of patents have grown by 14%, while filings from Canada actually shrank by over 22%. Canada's reduction in filings is by far the worst performance amongst the 152 member states of the worldwide. AI and machine learning are areas the government continues to invest hundreds of millions of dollars of taxpayer dollars into, yet Microsoft owns 1,030 machine learning patents, while all of Canada owns only 48. This chart is the unfortunate but very predictable outcome because Canada doesn't pay attention to owning IP. Innovation is the commercialization of ideas across all industries and all sectors. You cannot commercialize ideas unless you own them. In innovation economics, the firm is called the agent of innovation because that's where commercialization occurs. The strategic operating principle for firms is called freedom to operate and is at the core of the innovation economy because IP rights are by their very nature technical monopolies. By generating IP, you restrict others from using a valuable idea, and then you collect economic rent when others use that idea. When a company does this well and at scale, they generate successful innovation outcomes for their stakeholders and their national economies. Canada's policy community missed the shift from the tangible to the intangible economy. It never placed value on generating and owning IP assets. Further, as of today, we have no data strategy that ensures control of our data. As you can see from viewing the blue rectangular box on this slide, Canada's innovation outputs shrank since 2000 while global innovation outputs soared. Canada's weak performance in innovation currently costs our country several $100 billion a year. All of these outcomes despite consistent and increasing taxpayer investments over the decades. As an example, Canada spent $23 billion on innovation and skills just in 2014-15 alone. Based on recent internal government reports, our policy leaders know there is a major problem with statements like Canada's tech sector has fallen behind the rest of the world, and I quote, "A key challenge is the outsized role of subsidiaries of foreign companies in Canada's tech sector." This was reported in the exclusive story by The Logic this past summer. It sounds dire, but it suggests to me there is an opening to create real change, and in a minute, I'll show you how Canadian entrepreneurs and investors can work together to seize the opportunity. Because for all you've achieved to date, imagine if you could turbocharge that in a sustained fashion with proper public-private input mechanisms, just like other successful innovation economies have long implemented. Canada has a low and declining rate of business investment. This lack of investment is an effect on of company freedom to operate positions because they did not generate sufficient IP rights. If a company has high freedom to operate vis-a-vis competitors, then the cost of pursuing new opportunities is much lower and available potential opportunities are much higher. For investors, this means your $1 will turn into $2. This dynamic creates much more favorable private business investment opportunities, so it's IP assets and freedom to operate that must be established first, then the investment and the returns come second. From the policy perspective, this New Yorker cartoon is a good visual for where Canada finds itself today. Canada confuses innovation with other policy activities, and because of this, our innovation outcomes suffer. Innovation should not be confused with the science and technology research strategy for invention at universities. Innovation should also not be confused with the cheap jobs, foreign tech branch plant job strategy, which in our current approaches directly undermines Canada's innovation outcomes and thus undermines your investments in these companies. Here's a sample of 3 names that understand innovation economics. President Obama is declaring IP as America's most valuable asset and directing his policymakers to aggressively expand U.S. firms' global freedom to operate. An internationally renowned economist talking about the structures of today's value chains, and IP Europe blessing the EU Parliament's vote last week to support another 700 billion euros of investments into IP-intensive small, medium enterprises. I chose these examples because they cover topics that are fundamental to innovation policy design and because they are rooted in expertise that's coming from firm-level input. As an example, in 1974, the U.S. Congress mandated into law 26 private sector working groups to inform policy makers about firm-level trade requirements. And here's Canada's set of non-experts. Everything that appears here is either firmly rooted in an outdated understanding how the global economy works, or simply clueless statements not based on any firm-level experience. As a small example, innovation economists will tell you that successful tech companies now principally compete on staking positions in value chains of intangibles rather than by lowering costs into production supply chains. What is Facebook's supply chain for social media or Google's supply chain for search? How much Canadian-owned technology is used to operate Amazon warehouses? Yet those supply chains are being promoted as opportunities for Canadian entrepreneurs by administrators with no experience in how economic rents are generated in today's value chains. Just yesterday, Uber, which has space in the taxpayer-subsidized Mars and partnered with the New York City-based Jump for e-scooters and pedal-assistant electric bikes, said that bringing this partnership to the Canadian markets is a priority. What are Uber's Canadian partners other than minimum wage drivers? TPP was a trade agreement that received widespread criticism from innovation experts around the world for creating an inflexible IP regime that stifles innovators from emerging. Nobel laureate Paul Krugman opposed the way in which TPP strengthened IP monopolies and rigged dispute settlement mechanisms. Another Nobel laureate and pioneer of innovation economics, Joseph Stiglitz, called it the worst trade deal ever. Innovation policy experts similarly warned it would make Canada a permanent underclass in the global knowledge economy. But in Canada, a parade of non-experts urged Canada to sign the agreement without any review or economic analysis to show its cost to our economy. They made dubious claims that it would, quote, drive innovation, productivity, and growth, end of quote, as well as open up markets for Canadian entrepreneurs to 800 million new customers. What they don't know is that 98% of the world's trade in ICT already moves tariff-free because of the WTO, and that Canada had pre-existing trade agreements, but with all but 2 of the TPP countries. I personally sold Canadian technology in 150 countries without tariff issues. How do they explain that? The Amazon HQ2 bid was led by another non-expert who said that our competitive advantage is our cheap tech workers, in particular our software developers and engineers. and then added without any hint of irony that, quote, the government will work hard to keep it that way, end of quote. Quite apart from the fact that the government is supposed to work to increase, not lower our standard of living, the Amazon HQ2 bid was done without any consultation with Canadian tech companies or anyone materially affected by its outcomes. Predictably, the domestic tech sector was vehemently opposed to it, with one prominent scale-up entrepreneur telling a national newspaper that Canadian high-growth companies, quote, need Amazon HQ2 here like we need a hole in the head, end of quote. For Canadian tech CEOs, the prospect of Amazon's expansion into Toronto is materially adverse to their business, but it's just another public relations hobby horse for these non-experts. Now let me give you a couple recent examples of false myths or fake news in Canada's tech ecosystem. First is the claim by the head of our largest incubator in a national op-ed that Canada is now reversing the brain drain. As it turns out, this conclusion comes from an unscientific internal survey on a one-page Excel spreadsheet with only 55 respondents who reported that together they hired a sum total of 9 Americans in 2017. Contrast this with the University of Waterloo and computer science class survey reporting that 77% of their graduates are on their way to California. The second is a claim that Canada is the first country to have a national AI strategy, and apparently it's already performed beyond our wildest expectations. I was personally very interested in this claim, especially as it was already reported that more than 2/3 of Canada's IP on AI is owned by foreign firms. I happened to be in Ottawa 2 days after this claim was published, and I asked the government to see the documents for this amazing accomplishment. It turns out there are none. There is no strategy. They are apparently going to work on it, but nothing has changed other than Canadian taxpayers spending even more money on funding AI research, something that we've done for 30 years already. Microsoft alone owns 1,030 machine learning patents, while all of Canada owns 48. How does this constitute Canada's spectacularly completed AI strategy? Unlike you, who are entrepreneurs and investors working to grow their firms, these folks have no skin in the game. No pressure to create sales and revenues in the global marketplace filled with competitors. No pressure to create innovation success for their investors, employees, or families. But these misguided approaches inform our public discourse and our policy strategies, keeping Canada on a path of not designing relevant strategies to support our tech firms in the same fashion that other countries do. A government cannot be expected to deal with the very real issue of brain drain if we have an incubator administrators claiming there is no brain drain. Nor they can design an AI strategy where non-experts claim we already have one and that it's been completed ahead of schedule. Evidence-based policymaking needs to be rooted in actual evidence. The information needs to come from credible sources, practitioners of innovation economics, and most importantly, from Canadian entrepreneurs who are growing their businesses and trying to scale globally. Well-informed policy strategies are only hope of reversing current headlines about Canada falling behind in the global innovation race. On this slide, I also include a quote from an innovation report prepared for the federal finance minister, in which the authors openly say they have no evidence to support their claims, but they are content on conclusions based on anecdotes. Need I say more? The good news is that a lot can be done to eradicate outdated thinking, thinking and misinformation in your ecosystem. I have the real privilege of chairing the Council of Canadian Innovators, which is a business association built for our scale-up entrepreneurs. CCI's sole mandate is to rebuild the bridge between the domestic tech industry and our policy community, creating forums where Canada's most successful high-growth firms can talk to policymakers about strategies for access to talent, capital, and customers. These forums serve as a counter to the growing archipelago of conferences, festivals, and think tank panels where non-experts make up, reinforce, and disseminate ideas that are not rooted in the firm-level experience. And on my own, I try to call out the BS wherever I see it. Apart from publicly countering views and opinions that run counter to my experience of building Canada's the largest tech firm in Canada's history, I also implore the government to talk directly to tech CEOs. Just this morning, I was in Ottawa at the invitation of the Canada School for Public Service, giving a 2-hour lecture to senior civil servants on how the innovation economy works globally, and imploring them to engage with Canada's tech CEOs directly so they can learn what's needed to grow their revenues. I also called out an incubator I co-founded called Communitech when they make dubious claims. I deeply admire the work of Canadian entrepreneurs. You are women and men in the arena, doing the noble work of growing your businesses. Canadian entrepreneurs are job and wealth creators. They are investors and philanthropists who create private and public wealth that helps sustain our country. It is time we give the podium to the courageous, hardworking entrepreneurs, such as those in this room, who are commercializing Canadian ideas and building our country. Let's all demand that Canadian entrepreneurs must lead the public discourse on innovation and policy design input. You deserve an ecosystem rooted in expertise and attuned to your company's needs. I hope you will join this fight to reclaim your ecosystem and then let the world know that contrary to what these non-experts promote, Canada's competitive advantage is not a horde of chief software developers working for the net benefit of foreign economies. Canada's competitive advantage is our talented, hardworking entrepreneurs and the ideas they courageously seek to commercialize globally. Thank you.